Anaconda. The second way is installation of Anaconda in a virtual machine that would run Linux or actual Linux running on your computer. The process of installation is similar, but you probably should not try installation on the actual hardware unless you have some experience, and we're not going to cover this process in detail in this course. And the reason why you want to install Anaconda under Linux is because unfortunately some operating system related features of Python behave a little bit differently on Windows and on Linux. And while the differences are subtle, they might cause some issues, such as broken or failing to install libraries, different file path notations that are sometimes hard-coded in less popular libraries, inability to use process forking in multiprocessing to do fast and efficient forks, and possibly other things. So when you are programming things in Python, it is better to run it on Linux, if you have such option available, of course. So how do we install Linux on virtual machine? We will use VirtualBox, which creates and manages virtual machines. First we go to virtualbox.org and we press on the download button. Then you need to select version of VirtualBox that is appropriate for your host operating system. For example, if you are in Mac, then you want to download OS X host. If you are running on Windows, you want Windows host installer. After the download is complete, go to Downloads, run the binary, and follow the installation process. You will need administrator privileges to install it. Also, if you are running this under a root software management system, you can install VirtualBox also from the software installer. During the installation, we keep everything selected for installation because we need most of it anyway. We probably don't need the start menu entries, but that's up to you. What you don't need for sure are file associations. Then the installer will warn you that it will reset network connection temporarily during installation. This happens to install virtual network drivers that enables network communication between host operating system and virtual machine, as if they were the parts of the same local network. While VirtualBox is being installed, you need to go to ubuntu.com to get Linux installation image. There we will download an image for 20.04 long-term supported release of Ubuntu. And this is an ISO image that is 2.9 GB in size. That image includes the basic files that are necessary to install Ubuntu operating system. While we are downloading Ubuntu, a VirtualBox got itself ready. So we can keep the Start Oracle VM box after installation checked and press Finish. And it presents us with the default screen for VirtualBox. Here we need to press New to create a new virtual machine. At this point I will switch to my main operating system because this tutorial has been recorded in Windows Virtual Machine, and running virtual machine from virtual machine is not a very good idea. The interface is exactly the same except for the existing virtual machines. Here we press New, and now you first need to press Expert Mode. Then name our virtual machine, for example Python box. Then we select the type of operating system as Linux, and we select Ubuntu 64-bit version. If you are running on a 32-bit processor, you will not have that option. You will have to use Ubuntu 32-bit and you will have to download 32-bit installation image. If you have questions about that, please contact me and I will make a separate video in case someone still uses 32-bit processor. Now in the center part of this form, you need to select some amount of your random access memory dedicated to your virtual machine. 4 GB should be enough, but in case you have less than 8 GB, you want to dedicate about half of your available RAM. Then we want to create a new virtual hard disk. The first thing it will ask is location to put this virtual disk. And for that purpose you can store it in whatever place you like, where you have some free space on hard drive disk available. This virtual disk would be visible in your file system as a file, but from the perspective of virtual machine that would be a physical drive. In our case I will keep it in default suggested folder. So VirtualBox, VMs, Python box. And I will put a size limit on it set to 30 GB. The next choice depends on your preference. you can set it to be dynamically allocated, and then it will only take as much space as was actually used on that drive. So this file will be of a variable size between 0 and 30 GB, depending on how much data is actually written there. Or you can set it to fixed size. The fixed size disk will always take the maximum amount of space you've assigned to it. This option is useful for reserving space for virtual machines so that no other part of your system will overtake the space and cause your virtual machine to fail on attempt to write things to already occupied space. On the other hand, dynamic allocated might be useful if you are sharing your drive between different applications and virtual machines and frequently delete all data and free space. I will also use the default disk type, VirtualBox disk image, and dynamic allocation. Then I press create to finalize this part. Now we have created a virtual machine with default settings. To customize those, we'll press settings and we'll go to system tab. And we need to go to the second tab that says processor. There you want to allocate a virtual machine to run on all your processor cores that are available. In case of my machine, I have 6 physical cores or 12 cores if you count hyper-threading. Unfortunately, I can only use 6 because use of hyper-threaded cores is not suggested for virtual machines. Then, if you only have one core and you want limited amount of resources dedicated to this virtual machine, you can also limit this core down by the second bar. In other cases, you might also tune the amount of cores that you want to allocate before setting the execution cap. In display settings, you need to check that you have at least one monitor, and you might want to dedicate a little bit more in terms of video memory. I will add 128 MB to make sure that it supports any video resolution we ask from it. And depending on the operating system that you're using virtual machine on, you might want to set different graphics controller and maybe even enable the graphics acceleration, but it's not necessary at the moment for our use case. Then in storage part, we need to make sure that our Python drive is selected. And in the empty DVD drive, we want to choose the disk image and add the downloaded Ubuntu 20.04.3 desktop AMD64.iso image. AMD64 does not mean that you need to have AMD processor, it also applies for Intel processors. Next, you might want or not want to enable audio depending on your preferences, whether you want to hear something from your virtual machine or not. In the network tab, you need to have at least a network adapter that is attached to NAT, which is short for Network Address Translation. This means that your virtual machine will be able to see Internet via your host operating system, but neither Internet nor your host machine will be able to access your virtual machine directly unless you set up the port forwarding. Then you are recommended to set up one shared folder. In my case, I will share my code folder where I store my projects. And I will set it to auto mount, but I will not put any mount point here. I will let the system decide for the best place to put shared folder inside Linux file system. Finally, press OK button to save the changes. Now, by pressing start, we end up running our virtual machine. The first step is the installation of Ubuntu. If you have added ISO in settings, it will boot from it. You will need to select language, and I will select English. After setting language, we need to select the keyboard layout. The default one is United States. If you are using Finnish keyboard, you might want to pick that, as the special characters such as exclamation marks are in different places between those two. Some of you will also have United States keyboard layout on them, but you might want to select one that is suitable for you. You can type some letters in the field at the bottom to verify what is printed on your keyboard is actually output properly. Try a few special characters there to make sure it is set up correctly. Then you press continue, and then we'll want to have the minimal installation selected. We allow it to download and install updates while installing. And we don't really need to have proprietary third-party software at this moment. This will only be useful if you install Ubuntu on real hardware, because then you will need some proprietary firmware blobs, for example, for devices such as Wi-Fi, which are not open source. Then press continue again. And here, if we are doing this in virtual machine, it is safe to select erase disk and install option. Or if you are doing it on a real machine, then you probably want to pick other options. I select the default option to erase disk. And I will use neither logical disks nor disk encryption. Then it will present you with the final confirmation for the disk structure that it will create. In this case, it creates two partitions. One will be our root partition with ext4 file system, which is more or less standard file system format for Linux at the moment. And then there will be the first partition, which is going to be used as swap in case your virtual machine runs out of random access memory. On the next step, it asks where we are located to set up properly our time zone. I pick Helsinki here. And then it asks for our name. You don't have to use your real name, and you can change your username. I will go with user. You need to set up a password for your user. Finally, on this screen, we have option to log in automatically or require your password to log in. Because we're using this virtual machine, we can set it to log in automatically. Then we only need this password when we are going to do some administration tasks like installation of software. And we press continue and let operating system installation to proceed. After the installation is complete, we need to restart the virtual machine. When you see please remove installation medium message, you might need to go to your VirtualBox manager and go to machine storage, and then you need to verify that DVD drive is set to empty. If not, you need to remove the image manually by unchecking the boxes here. Then you can return to virtual machine and press enter. The machine will boot itself and present post-installation wizard. Here you don't need to set up any accounts, set up live patch, or send any system information. Neither you need to allow location services or install any extra software. The first thing that you need to do is to set up your display. To do that, you need to click on the 9 dots in the lower left corner to open menu and type displays in the search bar. And you will see in the search the application for display configuration. If you open it, you will see a few standard resolutions, and you should pick one that best for your screen, but does not go outside to cause scrolling. To enable better integration of virtual machine with host operating system, you need to install VirtualBox Guest Edition modules. This is a two-step process. First, you need to install the modules by executing the following command in terminal. So first you need to get to the terminal itself by opening the 9 dots and either type in terminal in search or finding it here. And once you have the terminal screen, you need to type the following command. Sudo sudo space apt space install space VirtualBox dash guest dash dkms space VirtualBox dash guest dash x11, and then you type enter, and then you need to enter your user's password and answer yes to the question whether you want to continue. And then you need to reboot the operating system. When it starts, you can go again to the terminal and check that the installation was successful by typing lsmod vertical pipe grep space vbox. Note the spaces around vertical pipe and after grep. And the output should look something like that. This output indicates that you have both VirtualBox SF and VirtualBox Guest modules loaded successfully in your kernel. After that, you should be able to activate Auto Size Guest Display option in Properties of VirtualBox. So we'll go to View and select Auto Resize. I had to toggle it because it was enabled automatically but didn't detect it from the first time. And as you can see, the display scaled itself automatically to the new resolution that matches exactly the size of my window. Now we can proceed to installing Anaconda. We can go the same way as in Windows. So we open Firefox. First we go to anaconda.com And then we go to Products, Individual Edition, and scroll down to the bottom of the screen to the section Anaconda Installers, and pick 64-bit x86 installer in the Linux column. Once the file is downloaded, you can use button Files on the left bar to go to Downloads folder. Once the file is downloaded, you can use button Files on the left bar. To launch the downloaded file, click with right mouse button on the file, select Properties in menu, switch to Permissions tab, and check Allow Execution box. In Linux, by default, the software you download is not executable to increase protection from viruses and other malicious programs. In order to run this file, you need to right-click on empty space of the folder and select Open in Terminal. Then, in Terminal, you need to type // and you can start typing Anaconda. First 3 letters will be enough, and then you press Tab, and it will autocomplete the rest of the file name. Then you press Enter. In Anaconda installer for Linux, you will have to review the license agreement by pressing Enter. After reviewing, if accept, type Yes. The default installation is set to your home folder. In my case, it's Home User Anaconda 3. Keep it that way. Then you will have a suggestion whether installer should initialize Anaconda 3. Do this by typing Yes and pressing Enter. Wait for Anaconda to install, and after that, it is best to reboot your computer and open Terminal again. Now you can see there is default prefix of Anaconda running already, even though we have not started it with any specific command. And we can check that Anaconda is available by typing conda, C-O-N-D-A, and this will provide us with default help message. To start Anaconda Navigator, we will need to type Anaconda Navigator. Please note the dash and small letters. Do not close this terminal window after you have started Anaconda, because your user interface is actually working from inside the terminal. Now you need to specify new password for new keyring, or you can leave this empty. This interface has the same functionality as interface in Windows, so I will not describe it in detail again. Also, as a hint, you can right-click icons of some programs in Linux and select Add to Favorites. So, for example, with this terminal, and Add to Favorites. This lets us pin frequently used applications, such as Terminal, in Start panel, so it will always appear here. Similarly, you can remove parts that we don't need. For example, this help, by selecting and pressing Remove from Favorites. And don't forget that you can always use Tab key to autocomplete any command you type in the terminal. Now we have Jupyter Notebook and our environment, so let's create a new environment here as well, because we only have the default one. Let's create an environment in Anaconda Navigator and add Jupyter Notebook here as well as we did in Windows. So we'll go to Home, select Lecture 1, and use Install button under Jupyter Notebook to install it. Also, please note that the list of default installed packages is quite different in Linux from that is available in Windows, and that is primarily because of the differences in operating systems.